Today we're running a mental well-being in a stressful world. How do we cope in a stressful world? Certainly this world is busy, isn't it? Our lives are full, they're full of stress. And how do we cope? How do we gain strength and deal with these different pressures that we encounter day by day? There's some of the different things that we're going to be examining and thinking about today. And you know what? The good news is that you don't need to rely on me for any expertise in this area. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Keith Condie. Give him a welcome as he comes up.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming up and being our expert here today. You might not feel like an expert.
No, I don't feel completely like an expert, but hopefully I have something to say.
Some wisdom you can share. Now, you're actually it's a fancy title, isn't it? The co-director of the mental health and pastoral care institute of Mary Andrews College.
It sounds very grand, doesn't it?
Is it as grand as it sounds?
Well, it's me and my wife both working part-time. How's that? So it's not really that good. Well, it's not really that grand. We're trying to do something in this particular space. So, yeah.
And what is it an area of interest for you, or just something that you've seen in your years of interacting with people?
It's sort of a bit of both. So I have some background in psychology and I have never worked as a psychologist, but I worked in child welfare for the state government for a number of years before I trained to become a minister. And I've always maintained that interest in the sort of psychological side of things, as well as what the Bible says about stuff. I think there's a lot of wisdom that can be gained from the research that's been done in this area. And I spent a lot of time over the years just chatting with people, both in working in churches, working in theological colleges. And so, I'm just very interested in people and concerned for people's well-being. And,
Now, many of us here will know you for your expertise in marriage. And we've done some seminars that you and Sarah have led on, and Sharon and Ian here facilitated that here for us last year on building healthy and strong marriages.
Yes.
And is this a new kind of area, this side of pastoral care, or sort of relating to the marriage?
They're actually related to each other. So Sarah and I have been running marriage enrichment courses for students at the college for a lot of years. And then when we started this new role about 7 years ago, that was the first thing that we did, because in terms of our well-being, as you hear today, one of the most significant things for our well-being is the quality of our relationships. And so we thought, what our institute's trying to do, we work three areas, sort of three key prongs to our strategy. One is prevention. So anything that can strengthen relationships, help us to manage stress well, is really good for mental health. And then there's sort of the equipping sort of side of things, trying to educate our churches, our pastors around mental health sort of concerns. And then the third prong is actually supporting people with lived experience of mental health challenges. We haven't done much in that third area, but that's the goal. You know.
And it's an increasing concern in our community, isn't it?
Yes.
And not just since COVID. I think I came across some statistics not so long ago that 2/3 of people who visit a GP these days actually go not with a physical ailment, but with some sort of emotional or mental struggle that they're dealing with, they want professional help with. So
absolutely, yes.
So it seems to be an increasing space that people need equipping and resourcing in.
I'll share some stats in just a moment.
Yeah, great. Well, I won't go there then. But thank you for coming up to share with us today, because certainly we as people want to be equipped and learn in this space. I say up because home is Lewisham, isn't it?
Yes. Look, I know you live here in God's own country on the Central Coast, next to this beach and everything else, a beautiful area. So we live in Sydney's inner west. So a little bit, if you know Sydney at all, just a bit outside the city to the western side, which is a very interesting part of Sydney. A bit quirky, really, but I mean, we love it. We love it, although it is very pleasant up here.
Well, look, thank you so much for coming to the coast. We really appreciate. We know it's a bit of an effort to to get up here. So we really appreciate you coming today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share for us.
Thank you. No, it's a great privilege to be with you. I just want to say first up, this is a challenging and difficult topic, and for a number of you personally, it's going to be. I'm certainly, it is not my intention to cause anybody any distress, okay? So let me be really upfront about that. I'm not going to talk about really dark, sort of stuff, but there will be some things that might sort of push a little bit of a button for you personally. And if you just feel like you need to take a break, either, completely switch off or leave the room for a little while, that's fine. I will not be offended, okay? And I'll just pretend you need to go to the toilet. And that's what everyone else will think as well. So just to start off, I just want to say this. I just want to say there's actually few things worse than poor mental health. There are few things worse. Here's how someone described their experience of depression. Let me just read this to you. I've likened it to being totally alone and vulnerable in a house. An intruder barges in with the intent to inflict the worst possible pain. You cannot know how long he will torture you. He keeps at it until he is at last satisfied. Then as he walks out the door, he flashes a sadistic smile and says, "I'll be back, so be expecting me." Here's someone else's story. Having anxiety and depression is like being scared and tired at the same time. It's the fear of failure, but no urge to be productive. It's wanting friends, but hating socialising. It's wanting to be alone, but not wanting to be lonely. It's caring about everything and then caring about nothing. It's feeling everything at once, then feeling paralysingly numb. That's another story. Friends, I don't actually need to tell you any stories, do I? Because we've all got a story. And if it's not you personally, it's someone you deeply care about, someone close to you. And I just want to say to you, I've got a story to tell as well. I'm not going to go into all the details of that. But I've had a family member hospitalised for their mental health. There's a guy called Thomas Insel. He was the head honcho of this big mental health organisation in America for a number of years. And he once said this. He said this about America, but this applies to Australia as well. Here's what he said. He said, there's two kinds of families in America. There's families that are struggling with a mental illness, and there's families who are not struggling with a mental illness yet. And that captures it, I think. Just the same here in our country. When it comes to mental health, them is us, okay? Them is us. So I think it's just great that you've put on this seminar on such an important topic. If you've got your outline there and just open it up, top page 2, here's where we're headed today. Three things I'd like us to look at. The first one, a little bit of an overview to understand when we're talking about mental health, what are we actually talking about, okay? Number 2, I want to think a little bit about stress and the impact of stress upon our mental health. And then thirdly, I want to share a few ideas with you about how to manage stress and to strengthen your own well-being. Okay, so that's where we're headed. Let's dive in. First point, understanding mental health. And I've got 6 things I want to share with you, okay? Number 1, this ties into what Mike said just a moment ago. First thing, mental health challenges are common. So here's the latest stats we have from Australia. From the Australian Bureau of Statistics, they put out some results from the National Study of Mental Health and Wellbeing. This came out July last year. And this is figures from 2020, 2021. Okay, so actually the pandemic had started when they gathered this data. And what they found is more than 1 in 5 of us experience symptoms at a level where you could be diagnosed with a mental health disorder. Every year, 1 in 5. Throughout our lifetime, more than 2 in 5, almost half of us will experience some sort of significant mental health challenge. The most common you'll see there, anxiety, 17% of the population. in each 12-month period experience an anxiety disorder. Mood disorders, that includes things like depression, 7.5% of the population. Substance abuse, that's abusing alcohol, other drugs, more than 3% of the population. And I just want to draw your attention to young people because the stats here are pretty disturbing. In any 12-month period, 40%, 2 in 5, of 16 to 24-year-olds experience a mental health disorder, and especially young women. Look at this stat for anxiety in young women, more than 41%. These are pretty sobering statistics. And friends, I just want to say to you, this is talking about people, right, where the levels reach a level where a doctor will say, okay, we're going to diagnose you with this condition. But there's this thing called, it's described as psychological distress, okay? Psychological distress is just symptoms of anxiety and depression that perhaps haven't reached that clinical level, but they're still there, and those stats are even much higher than this. And what it's really saying is within our community, there is lots of emotional heartache going on. Okay? So that's the first point. Second point, good mental health is not simply the absence of mental illness. So when I say this word, mental health, what do you think of? What comes to mind? Your brain. Something to do with your brain. But for most of us, we think about a problem, right? A mental health problem. But good mental health is more than simply the absence of illness. Okay? Now, lots of people, they see mental health on a continuum. So down one end here, you've got really good mental health, and down the other end, you've got severe mental illness. And then, we're all somewhere in between on that scale. And I want to suggest to you, it's actually more helpful to have two lines. And if you see over there on page 3, I've got a little diagram. I don't know whether you can read that diagram. The print didn't come up terribly well. But there, you probably can't read the fine print on the actual coloured bit. But just look at these two axes, right? You see that horizontal line, the one going across like that? Down one end, no mental illness. Down the other end, severe mental illness. So this is what you would call a mental health disorder, a mental illness line. From nothing to severe. Okay, that's the way people normally think about mental health. But there's also this line that goes up and down, the vertical line. And this is a wellbeing line. And what this diagram suggests is our mental health is not just about whether or not you've been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. It involves much more than that. You think about our mental health, it's just like our physical health in one sense. We've all got it, whether there's a problem or not. And when you think about physical health, you know how you have some days when you just feel a bit tired, a bit run down, a few aches and pains. It doesn't mean you've got a physical illness, does it? That's just life. It's the same with our mental health. You ever wake up and you just feel a bit blah? Okay, well I do. And that doesn't mean you have a mental health disorder. And let me tell you why I like this diagram. Because if you can read the print, see that top left-hand little bit? It says flourishing with mental ill health, with mental illness. I got a friend who's got bipolar disorder, pretty serious mental illness. And you know what? She does life really well. She works, very productive, very engaged in her relationships. Her condition is managed extremely well by the doctors, the medications that she takes. And she does a whole lot of things, builds a whole lot of things into her life that move her up that vertical dimension. Okay, that line, that well-being line. So she's actually flourishing in life even though she's got a very significant condition, right? Now, on the other hand, if you go down to the bottom right-hand side, you see the word there? Languishing. The top half's about flourishing, the bottom half's about languishing. And there are people who don't have any diagnosed condition, but because of the way that they live their life, they actually languish. Their well-being is very poor. I'll just give you an example. Okay? I'm sure there's no one, you would not know anybody who is anything like this. But just imagine someone who, they stay up late every night playing computer games. And they only eat junk food. And they hardly ever get out in the sunshine and get any exercise. And when they're not playing computer games, they're just on social media all of the time. You know what? If you live your life like that, you're going to end up in a languishing sort of state, because our bodies are just not designed to work that way, or our minds. Okay? So, all right, so top section, flourishing, bottom section, languishing. That's that diagram. Okay, let's go to number 3. You'll see there, bottom of page 3 in your notes, difficult and negative feelings are not necessarily a problem. Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? We do not want to call everyday distress a mental health disorder. It may be a perfectly appropriate response to stressful circumstances. Now, I don't know what COVID did to you guys, right? I don't know what your experience was like and lockdown was like. But for a lot of people, do you know what it did? It pushed people on that diagram who are on the top right, who are flourishing, who have no mental health condition, and pushed a lot of them down into the languishing state. And do you know why? Because a whole lot of the normal stuff of life that does us good was just taken away from us. Our normal support mechanisms were cut off. We experienced a whole range of losses, and you would expect this to impact us because that's the way we're designed to work. And I want to say to you, our negative emotional responses are often the right response. If you experience a significant loss, that brings grief. And that's a right response. Personally, I think it's a God-given response that enables us to process those feelings and to be able to move forward again. And one of the really interesting things I think that's happening in our society is our language is becoming more medicalised. So here's what I hear around the traps, particularly amongst young people. Someone's feeling a bit sad. What do they say? I'm depressed. Someone's worried about something. What do they say? I've got anxiety. Somebody experiences a difficulty or a hardship in their life. What do they say? I've been traumatised. And I don't think this helps us, because when it just sort of sending the message that the ordinary down sort of feelings of life, when they get described as mental health disorders, it just sends the wrong message about what our world's like. This world, it's a beautiful world, right? You live in a beautiful place, but it's also shot through with hardship and difficulty and pain, and you've all experienced that, as I've experienced that. So, amongst young people particularly, we don't want to create an environment where, normal adolescent mood swings, they get told, oh, you've got a really serious condition here, when that's just the stuff of life, okay? And that leads on to the next point. Number 4, over the page. There are criteria for determining if someone is experiencing a significant mental health challenge. Here are the criteria. So what are the things, back to our diagram, what are the things that push someone towards that left-hand side of a diagnosable condition? And there's 3 things. One is significant distress. Notice that word significant. I'm not talking about everyday distress. I'm talking about something that is really impacting you. And you normally know whether it's significant or not by the second point. And that word there, impairment. So suddenly, you cannot do life the way you normally do life. You struggle to do work or study, or your relationships are being damaged because of what's going on with your mental health. Now, okay, what do I mean by being impaired? Oh, sorry, this is the third factor there, persisting over time. So we're talking about not something that lasts for a few days, but something that goes on for a number of weeks. Now, you think about the way that we work as human beings. We all fall into certain patterns of thinking, okay? Our thoughts are really important. We fall into habits and patterns of feeling, okay? We have an emotional life. And doing, our behaviours, okay? We all have these things. Mental ill health is when those patterns become extreme and uncontrollable and affect our ability to do everyday life. Okay? So mental ill health, it isn't just like physical illness, but one similarity is that it's not due to weakness of character. It's not something that you can just snap out of. It's something that's really going on in our bodies and our minds that's impacting us very severely, okay? Generally speaking, the earlier that mental ill health is recognised and treated, normally the better the outcome. So I just want to say something very, very important right now. I'll say it again throughout the morning, but I want to say it right now. If anything I've just said has raised significant concerns for you or someone you care about, please seek help. And normally, the best first port of call is your GP. Okay? So I just want to put that on the radar. All right, let's go to number 5. Mental health challenges are not just all in the mind. Hey, how's that? All in the mind? No, it's not all in the mind. We are incredibly complex beings, and psychologists are very aware of all the complex factors that feed into what's going on with our mental health. What are those factors? Well, genetic stuff comes into play. So let me tell you about my family, my extended family. Anxiety runs in our extended family. All of us are prone to it. I'm prone to it. I've got to be pretty careful with some of the things that I do, or I know where I can end up. Okay? There's environmental factors. Did you know that the family you grew up in has an impact upon you in various ways? And for some of us, that's been a beautiful, enriching, positive experience. For some of us, it hasn't been like that, has it? Or both, a mixture of both. And that impacts our mental health makeup. It's one of the factors that feeds into it, as does our present circumstances. The amount of stress that you're experiencing in your life, the sort of stuff that's going on around you, the quality of the relationships that you have, all of these things. And the model the psychologists talk about, they talk about a biopsychosocial model. What they're saying is, when it comes to your mental health, there's biological factors, your genetics and all that sort of stuff, your brain chemistry. There's psychological factors. There's the sort of habits that you fall into with your thinking patterns and stuff like that. There's social factors. There's the quality of your relational life around you. All of those things have an impact. I'd just like to add something, and okay, this comes from my own personal beliefs and worldview. I'd like to add a spiritual dimension to this. And it's really interesting. Even the secular, non-Christian sort of people working in the psychology space, a lot of them are now acknowledging the significance of the spiritual dimension to our mental health. And but I just want to say, if you are a Christian believer, it is not helpful to be simplistic here. And what I mean by that is, sometimes you hear Christian people saying, someone's got depression or they've got anxiety, and they quote a Bible verse at them, and they say, just don't be anxious and all will be good. Let's read the Bible and we'll pray about it and we'll all go away. No, it won't, friends. No, it won't. It is much more complicated than that. And yes, I believe Christian faith and the church, I'll talk about this later, can make a huge difference for us, but it doesn't simplistically fix significant mental health challenges. Okay, more complicated than that. Final point here under this first section, number 6, good mental health involves the ability to have positive experiences even in the midst of challenging life circumstances. Okay, this is very important. Do you know what most people think? That back to our diagram, right? Whether you're up or down, for a lot of people, they think it's all to do with your circumstances in life. Whatever's happening, that will determine how you feel. Not true. Not true. Our experience of life and how we feel has far less to do with our circumstances and much more to do with what we're paying attention to. With what we're paying attention to. We're talking here about our mindset, And mindset just means the lens through which you view life, through which you understand and interpret the circumstances and the difficulties that you face in life. And what we pay attention to is the most significant factor in shaping our mindset and our outlook on life and the perspective and the lens that we're viewing things. There's a Christian pastor, a guy called John Mark Comer. He wrote a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And you know what he said in that book? He said, I quote, he says, "What you give your attention to is the person you become. What you give your attention to is the person you become." Interesting. And that's because, have you heard about how our brains are plastic? You ever heard this? Neuroplasticity. Yeah. It's not that they're made out of plastic stuff, right? It's just our neural, the pathways by which our mind works, they get shaped and altered by what we do and what we pay attention to. So, for example, you think about learning to ride a bike. If you ever learned to ride a bike, that just sort of stays with you. It becomes automatic. Driving a car. Can you remember learning to drive a car for the first time? How much concentration and energy that took? And what's it like now? You're on autopilot. Those pathways have become very strongly entrenched. And it's the same with other habits in our life. The more you do stuff, the more you think about stuff, the stronger the ruts get worn into our brain. Okay? Now, I've got a question for you. This is a very, very important question. Has anybody noticed a tree today? A tree, those things that grow. Has anybody noticed a tree today? Yes? Can someone please tell me about your tree?
It's really big and really pink.
It's pink. Do you know what sort of tree it is? Sorry? No? It's flowering?
Yes.
I wonder whether it's a magnolia, a burgundy sort of colour?
No, like this color.
Okay. How gorgeous. It was very pretty and you noticed it. Did you feel good when you looked at that tree? What a beautiful experience. Has anybody else noticed a tree today? Yes? Can you tell us about your tree?
I go for a walk every morning.
Yes?
I notice the gum trees.
The gum trees. Now, do you prefer smooth bark gum trees or roughed bark gum trees? Rough?
Yes.
And what colour foliage gum tree do you particularly like?
Greens.
Yeah, the bark. I love eucalypts also, gum trees. I love gum trees. And in our house there in the inner west, I know it's the inner west, I know it's the big smoke, but guess what? We actually back onto a park. And in the park is a magnificent eucalypt gum tree. Huge. And I can stand on our deck and I can look across. And in fact, I've actually claimed that tree for my own. I say, that's my tree. The council actually owns it, but I've claimed it as my own. But you know what? There's people who walk through my park and they don't even notice my tree. And do you know why? Here's one reason. One reason is this reason. They walk through the park like this, right? And there's my tree, looking beautiful, wanting to enrich their day, and they don't even notice it. Isn't that sad? That's pretty tragic, isn't it? There's a second reason why people don't notice trees, and that's because of what's going on in here. What I call it brain chatter, mind chatter. The thoughts that are racing through our head. And for a lot of us have what's called negative ruminating thoughts. We sort of ruminate, we keep dwelling on particular thoughts, often, very negative stuff. And that dominates our thinking, and we don't actually notice what's taking place in the world around us, and that impacts our sense of mental well-being profoundly. Okay? So we're going to come back. I'll say a little bit more about this after morning tea. But I just want to say to you, when we spend at least a little bit of time focusing on beautiful, positive things, it changes our experience of life. That's been my experience. Okay. The last thing I want to say under this first section, we're trying to understand what mental health is, okay? It's a little bit of a picture. The last thing I want to say is, with our diagram, right, every single one of us, whether you've got a diagnosed mental health condition or not, every single one of us can take steps that move us up that line in the middle, that vertical well-being line. And I'll talk about some of that stuff after morning tea. Okay? Let me just pause there quickly for a moment and just ask any questions that have arisen from that anyone would like to ask. Does that make sense? Oh yeah, sorry, question here.
I actually hug the trees and talk to trees.
Sorry, you hug the trees. Wow. And talk to them. Do they talk back? Probably not. But still, that's a beautiful experience, isn't it? Yeah, makes you feel good. Yes. Oh, there you go. So being in Israel, you smell that eucalyptus smell and it just takes you back home. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Let's just begin our second section and think about stress. Okay, so we've talked about understanding mental health. Now I want to just think a little bit about stress and how stress impacts our mental health. So up the top of page 5, you'll see there, stress is a bodily response. Now, stress is not just something in your head, you know, like mental health, not just all in your mind. Stress is very much to do with our bodies, okay? Real physical changes in our bodies. Stress is the response that our brain triggers whenever we have to do anything, in fact. Whenever you find yourself in a situation that requires some effort, I'm under a lot of stress at the moment. I don't feel bad, but I'm under a lot of stress because I'm up here and I'm trying to say something helpful to you all and I'm trying to concentrate and focus, and that's stressful. And my body is enabling me to do that. And you see there, some stress is good for us, okay? It's actually normal. A lot of what we call stress is distress, right? Distress. Too much stress or the wrong sort of stress. But our stress response is actually a wonderful part of the way that I believe God has made us to function and be involved in our world. Now, you might think, right? You might think it's coffee that gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you going. It's not true. It's not the coffee. It's stress. Because without your stress response, you'd never get up and you'd never get anything going and nothing would ever happen. And one of the really good impacts of stress is it motivates us and improves our performance. So I've just got a little diagram. I don't think I put this in. No, I didn't. It's not in your notes, but I think it's up on the screen. You've got a little. Here we go. Okay, so 2 researchers came up with this little model, and you see performance there on that upright axis, and then on the bottom, the level of stress. So if you've got low stress, no stress, you're bored, there's no pressure, you don't get anything done. If you've got too much, you'll see that causes a lot of anxiety and unhappiness. You start to freak out. But there's an area right in the middle where we do really well. So here's what I'm saying to you, friends. Stress is like Goldilocks, right? Just the right amount is what we're all after and looking for. Okay, so stress, it's a bodily response. That's an important part of how we function. What generates this response is what's called part of our autonomic nervous system. Okay, so here's a bit of technical language for you, but just try and stay with me for a moment, and I'll just try and help you understand what's going on here. So there's 2 parts of the autonomic nervous system. One's called the sympathetic nervous system. It doesn't mean, this is the part of your nervous system that's very in tune with your feelings. No, it's not that sort of sympathy. This is where your stress response comes into play. This is the accelerator in your body that gets you going, revs you up, okay? And if you heard of fight and flight response, that's the stress response. That's what the sympathetic nervous system does. Now, there's also a second part. It's called the parasympathetic, and this is the brake. And this is the part of your nervous system that settles you down and calms you and makes you feel all steady and okay. And this it's called, the rest and digest, calming. This is where your body goes into doing all its normal everyday functioning activities like digesting food, keeping your body temperature stable, all of that sort of stuff's done by the parasympathetic nervous system. The thing about these two parts is they work a little bit like a seesaw. When one's turned up, the other's turned down. So I'll give you a little example of how this works out. How do you feel if you eat a big lunch? How do you feel? You feel full. What else do you feel? Sleepy, drowsy, right? Tired. Do you know why? Okay, you've just stuck a whole lot of food into you, and your parasympathetic system is saying, we need to digest this food. The only way we're going to do that is if we settle this person down so the sympathetic side is not revved up. We need to get the parasympathetic going so it tries to shut you down. So you get all drowsy and sleepy so it can try and digest all the food. Okay? That's the way these sort of things work. A bit like a seesaw. A bit like a seesaw. And this is important. We'll come back to this a little bit later. Okay, so stressors. Let me talk to you about stressors. A stressor is anything that brings on this stress response, okay, that makes the sympathetic nervous system the accelerator that starts to get it revving, okay? So, and stressors come in various forms. Some of them are external to us, external pressures. Some of them are internal, to do with what's going on in our head. Let me just try and explain this for you. What are some of the external stressors that impact us? Well, if you're working, work pressures, okay, can be very stressful. I've experienced that. You might be part of the sandwich generation. You might have elderly parents you've got to look after as well as children or grandchildren. That's the stage of life that we're in at the moment, particularly for my wife. His mum's still alive, lives up here on the Central Coast, 90 years old. Needs to care for her, and she also needs to care for our little granddaughter a day a week. So there we are. There's a bit of pressure associated with that. As delightful as both of those things are. It might be relationship troubles. It might be financial pressures. The housing crisis and the interest rates, all of that sort of stuff that's going on at the moment. That's external stuff that creates stress for us. But here's the really interesting thing. There's also stress that we generate here in our own heads. To do with, I talked about mindset before. The way we think about things can actually create stress for us. Let me try and give you a couple of examples. I'm a little bit of a people pleaser. Okay, I don't like being criticised. But sometimes, sometimes you do get criticised in life. That's hard. But when you go through life constantly wanting to please people all the time and constantly worried about reactions from others, that creates a lot of internal stress. So that's one example. I'll give you another example. Let's just imagine you're a parent of a toddler and you're in a shopping centre and that toddler chucks a wobbly, right? Real tantrum in the shopping centre. How do you feel? Sorry for the mother, yeah. Well, it's interesting. Some parents actually cope with that really well and they just shrug it off. Sorry, just toddler, who cares? I don't care what other people think. I'm not embarrassed. Whereas for others, that is profoundly, deeply embarrassing. And they think everybody's watching me. Everybody thinks I'm a hopeless parent, blah, 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 blah. Okay? There's the same situation, but different mindset results in a different experience of stress. Okay? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to it. The bottom line is this. The amount of stress that you experience is not just to do with what's going on in your external world and those pressures. A lot of it's got to do with what's going on in here. And we need to understand that. Okay, next point there. Stress is necessary for our survival. Okay, I spoke about how stress improves our performance, But stress does something much more important than that. It actually is very good at keeping us alive. Now, the human brain has incredible abilities, doesn't it? We can design bridges. I'm sure some of you write romantic poetry, for example. The human brain can do this. All sorts of things. What's the number one job of the human brain? To keep us alive. Exactly. To keep us alive, our survival. And one of the ways our brain keeps us alive is through our stress response. So I've told you I live in the inner west. In the inner west, there's a lovely walk called the Bay Walk. We have water in Sydney too. Ironcote Bay. It's a track, beautiful track, shared by pedestrians and cyclists. One day I'm walking along. Cyclist comes around the corner, high speed, almost knocks me over. Now, even before I had begun to process what was occurring, I jumped out of the way because I had a stress response. My brain had triggered the release of adrenaline and other chemicals in my body, and my heart rate had gone up, blood pressure had gone up, the blood had been redirected from my tummy into my large muscles so I could just very quickly get out of the way. That's a stress response, okay, to keep me alive. And that fight-flight response has been with us for thousands of years. But because our bodies are actually wired to react this sort of way, what's happening nowadays is this. You can be sitting in a chair, comfortable chair, or you might be working in front of a computer, and you can have the same chemicals because of your mindset, what's going on in your head, your thoughts. You can have the same chemicals racing through your body as a person who's trying to escape from a bushfire. Okay? And all that stuff, all that brain chemistry, body chemistry is reacting in that sort of way. And in fact, our brains are so sophisticated that we have the ability to anticipate future troubles that may not ever happen. Now, I brought a little friend with me this morning to show you. I'm just going to go and get my little friend. It's okay, my friend's not alive. Here we go. This is Ziggy. Ziggy the zebra. Okay, now I want you to imagine Ziggy sitting out there on the savannah, the plains of the savannah in Africa. And let's think, Ziggy's having lunch, chewing away on the grass. And Ziggy hears a rustle in the bushes over there. What does Ziggy do? What do you think Ziggy will do? Bolt, take off at high speed. Why? Ziggy is very happy to forego lunch so that she doesn't become lunch for some hungry lion, okay? That's what Ziggy's brain is designed to do for survival. 99 times out of 100, what do you reckon the rustle in the bushes is? Snake, little animal, the wind. But Ziggy doesn't hang around. Ziggy's all about survival. Now, let me tell you what I don't think Ziggy does. Now, I can't say this for sure. I've never been inside a zebra brain. But I don't think Ziggy worries about whether she's going to become lunch for a lion tomorrow. Okay? Ziggy lives in the moment. But the human brain is so sophisticated, we have the ability to worry about something that might happen tomorrow or next week or next year that probably won't happen, whether it's getting a parking ticket, getting cancer, worried about our children, whatever it is, we can do this. And because the number one job of our brains is to keep us alive, our brains have, this is a very important concept, our brains have what's called a negativity bias. Your brain is much more tuned in to problems and difficulties and hardship and pain than it is to positive, beautiful things. Because it needs to be, because it's wired to try and keep you alive. And it's a little bit like this, Teflon, right? What happens with Teflon? non-stick, slides off. When it comes to positive experiences in our lives, our brains are like Teflon. They skid off. When it comes to positive stuff, our brains are like Velcro. They stick and they stay. That's the negativity bias in our brain. Okay, one more thing before we take a break for morning tea. And down there to bottom of page, close to the bottom of page 5, chronic stress. I want to talk to you about chronic stress. I've said, okay, all of us go through periods of intense stress. It might be dodging the bicycle on the Bay Walk, or it might be, spending some weeks living in the realities of COVID. And our bodies are very well designed to cope with short-term stress. Okay, we do that really well. Stress is not the problem. Chronic stress is the problem. Those stress hormones that our body, you've probably heard of adrenaline and cortisol, they're not actually stress hormones, they're action hormones. They're the things that enable us to do anything. So the problem is, it's the difference between the exceptional and the normal. And when we're in a state of high stress for long periods of time, that's called chronic stress, and that's incredibly bad for us and for our mental health. So let me give you another little illustration. Okay, I want you to imagine you're standing in a swimming pool. I find this quite scary. I'm just about to make a confession to you. I can't swim. Okay, so for me, the level in the swimming pool is pretty significant. Fancy being an Australian who can't swim. Anyway, that's another story. I've had lots of swimming lessons. Basically, I can't float, I just sink. Okay, swimming pool. Imagine the water level, your baseline stress level is, it's down about your knees. Okay, so you got water up to your knees. That's okay, that's fine. That's pretty comfortable, isn't it? And then you go through a period of more intense stress. There might be a real difficulty in a relationship that's important to you, and you're really feeling that. So the waves of the water level comes up to your waist in that period. Okay, that's fine. And after time things settle down, the water level goes back down, you're okay. I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine if your baseline stress level, okay, the way that you live life normally, your baseline stress level, the water is up to here. And then what happens when you're hit with the next big, difficult, nasty thing? You feel like you're drowning and you're going under. This is the experience of chronic stress. And that is very uncomfortable. And normally when we're in that situation, we turn to various things to help us cope. And for lots of us, it might be we just sort of want to shut down and try and get a lot of sleep. Or we might turn to what's so-called soft addictions. So, you might binge eat, or binge on Netflix, or binge on your computer games, or shop online. Do that lots of people do that when they're stressed. Other people turn to more harmful, nasty addictions, alcohol, pornography, gambling. And the thing about chronic stress is it's not only uncomfortable, it's dangerous. So look at this quote, bottom of the page, from a neuroscientist, someone who studies the human brain. Over time, anything that contributes to chronic stress can gradually eat away at your brain and cause illness in your body. That's what happens. Those hormones constantly racing through you with no time for recovery, they damage our arteries, they change our blood pressure, they change the way insulin works in your system, they change the way your digestive system works, and they change the way your brain works. They change your brain. Prolonged stress alters your brain chemistry and your neural pathways. And that's why there's a link between chronic stress and anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions. So I've just got a little question here for you. How do you know when you're experiencing chronic stress? Let me tell you some of the really common things that you will experience. Number one, I didn't put this in your notes. Number one, you will find it harder to sleep. You'll either have trouble getting to sleep or you'll wake up in the night. Okay, that's one sign. A second sign, your emotions become more fragile. So you might be more anxious, more irritable, more teary. You start crying during the ads. I sometimes do that. You find it harder to regulate your feelings, your emotional responses. A third thing, you become hypersensitive to other people and their comments. Very reactive. Oh, someone, a friend, a family member says something, little thing, you're jumpy about it. Another thing is you find it hard to concentrate and to be productive. And then finally, other things in our bodies, things like muscle tension or headaches or digestive problems. Okay? So there you go. That's a little bit about stress, something in our bodies. Some stress, really good for us, gets us going. But when it's around all of the time and we have no time for the water level in the pool to go back down again, we're in trouble. And that will impact our mental health. Okay? So just think for a moment. We're going to break now for morning tea, but I just want you to think, where's the level of water in your swimming pool at the moment? Okay? Don't tell me, but just think about that. And are you aware when you're under stress? How do you react? How does it impact your body? How does it impact your feelings? Are you actually in touch with what the information your body is telling you? That might be something for you to reflect upon later.
Great first session with Keith. Now we're looking forward to the second session, but I thought before we go into the second session, there's on your tables, and you might like to take this home, then just if you need to reach out to someone, help ASAP, there's some contacts there, or ongoing help, there's some great contacts there as well, or there's some good resources at the bottom of the page. So please take that home. It might be for you, it could be for someone else that you love and you want them to get good help. There's some great help there as well. Also, we do these events many times throughout the year, and so we wouldn't mind your feedback to say what you thought of the event and things like that. So you can put your details there. We hold other events, so you might want to be told about other events, and just say, yeah, please tell us about other events coming up. We've got one called Hope Explored. That's a good one, because a lot of people are looking for hope these days, and peace and purpose. And myself and my wife, Jeff and Robin, we run a course over, it's only 3 Sundays for about an hour and a half on Sundays at 3 o'clock. So here, so if you're interested in that, you can tick that off. Please put some comments. We'd love to know what you thought, or maybe of the food. You might think, oh, Jeff's quite funny. We'll have him again as a speaker or whatever next time. Or Keith's been excellent as well, so you might want to give him some feedback there and he'll have a look at that feedback. So leave them on your chairs, or I'll be walking around later on and you can give them to me. But I'll hand back over to Keith now. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Okay, wow, what a morning tea. There's lots of good things about being up here. I can see it's not just the lovely location away from the big smoke. It's all other things. Now, so what have we done? We've looked at, tried to get a little bit of an understanding about what we mean by mental health. We've thought a little bit about stress and how that impacts our mental health. We're now going to do some more positive stuff. But before we do that, I want to show you something. I've got here, see this jar? This jar is you. Okay? That's not a put down. I'm the jar as well. Well, let's just say the jar is me. Now, let's think about the impact of stress upon us and what we can do about it. There are some things we can do nothing about, So I've got some stones. Genuine inner west stones. I talked about the things that impact our mental health, and there's biological stuff. So for me, I've got all this history or to do with my genetics and my family background, and that's all impacting my mental health. And I've got that, and then I've got sort of, the stresses in my life that come my way, and some of that stress is good stress and some of it's a little bit more difficult. And that's all filling up my jar. But it gets to a certain point where there's so much stress that it just tips out over the top. And that's when people end up, perhaps, one of the factors that feed into things like mental health challenges. It's got a little bit of echo. Is that from my end? Am I doing something wrong? Better? That's better. Okay, that's great. Now, what can you do about this? Lots of people say, well, the only thing you can do is to take out the stones so they don't tip over the edge, so you don't end up with depression or anxiety or something else. Right? What I'm going to share with you for the rest of the session is a different approach. Okay, so I've got something else hiding over here in the corner. And it's not an animal. It's not Z. Look at this. And if instead of this being me, if this is me, and I've got the same stressors in my life and my own genetic makeup and my psychological makeup, they don't tip over the top because I've increased my capacity, right? Now, I just want to say something very important. Some of you might be in a situation where there is nothing, where most of the stress upon you is what's called systemic. It's part of the system that you belong to. It might be a workplace. It might be a difficult family situation, okay? And sometimes the problem is in the system and that needs to be sorted, and I can't do anything about that. This is simply about where you have some choices that you can make that can have an impact, that can actually build your capacity, okay? So what I want to share with you is, quickly, 7 ideas. I'll put this over here, get this out of the way. 7 things that can help build your capacity, okay? So we're here now on page 6, up the top, managing stress and strengthening your well-being. But before I do this, I've got a little plug. Some of you have told me that you've done our marriage course that Sarah and I developed. We've developed another course, and it's called Press On, Building Resilience and Mental Wellbeing. And if the things that I share now, sort of the things we've been talking about today, think, I'd like to explore that a little bit further, people have found this course very helpful, just in enabling them to do that. And you can either do it online, or you can do it in a little group together, watch some videos, got workbooks. It's a great chance just to reflect upon stress in your life and the sorts of things that might build your well-being. Do we have that clip? Do you think that might work? I'll just show you, here's a little preview to give you a sense of what's in the course, if this works.
Every person experiences challenges throughout their life. It might be financial difficulties,
Tree.
moving to a new city or country, becoming a parent, or the loss of a loved one. These can all impact our mental health. For Christian believers, our deep desire is to continue to serve Christ faithfully through such challenges. What can help us to do that?
We're Sarah and Keith Condie, and we direct the Mental Health and Pastoral Care Institute in Sydney. We've put together an online course that helps us take good care of our mental health. It's called Press On, Building Resilience and Mental Wellbeing. We believe that Christian faith can have a profound impact upon our well-being. So in the course, we draw upon spiritual truths of the Bible as well as key insights from psychological science.
You'll learn about stress and how it impacts us. You'll learn about resources and activities that we can draw upon that help us to manage stress. You'll also hear stories from people about what helps them to press on. And you'll have the opportunity to think about your own life and small steps you can take to assist your well-being.
You can sign up and work through this course on your own, or you can join as a small group, such as your Bible study group, and work through it together. We believe this course can do you a lot of good, and in so doing, enable you to continue to do good to others.
Okay, sorry, a blatant bit of advertising, but anyway, you may find that helpful, so I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so 7 things we're going to work through, 7 tips. And the first one you'll see there, treat your body the way it's designed to work best. We've talked about how our bodies and our minds are intimately related. Okay, mental health's not just all in the mind. Last year, another neuroscientist, a guy called Paul Taylor, wrote a book called Death by Comfort. And he says in our modern world, for many of us, our lives are very comfortable. And by that he means you can do things like, if you're still working, you come home from work, you can put your feet up, you can avoid having to deal with people, you can have takeaway delivered to your home, you can stay up late watching Netflix or something like that. It's very convenient, it's very laid back, it's very comfortable, but Taylor says it's killing us. Literally. He says adults nowadays are the most overweight, depressed, medicated and addicted group that has ever lived. And he says something is wrong with modern life. His point is that our bodies and minds are not designed for this sort of lifestyle. He says the human genome, that's our genetic makeup, he said it hasn't changed for 45,000 years. So just have a look at this quote here, see in your notes. The human genome requires us to move lots, eat real food, experience occasional discomfort followed by recovery, and to be highly socially connected. Now look, I know this assumes certain levels of ability and, not having certain medical conditions and all of that, okay? But let's just think about what he's saying here for the majority of us anyway. He says if we want to flourish as human beings, we need to have to embrace a certain level of discomfort. This is really interesting, isn't it? A certain level of stress is good for us. He says our greatest achievements tend to involve being pushed out of our comfort zone. And so let's think for a moment about these things he mentions here. First, the discomfort of moving our bodies. Now, there's not many hunter-gatherer peoples left in our world today, but there is at least one, and it's a group of people called the Hadza people in Tanzania in Africa. And they've been researched really closely, and researchers have found that on average, these people do about 14 times as much moderate to vigorous physical activity as the average Australian. 14 times more. Okay? When we engage in physical activity, it boosts a whole lot of feel-good hormones in our bodies, our neurotransmitters, which affect our moods, our motivation, our sleep, our ability to concentrate. Our bodies are designed to move. Okay? Sarah and I, our experience is we try and go for a walk most mornings. It's been a little bit impaired lately. Sarah's done something to her foot. She can't walk. But we just find if we get up and go for a walk, our experience of the day is different. It just changes your whole perspective on a day. That's just one little example, okay? Second, he says there, he talks about what we eat. Now, do you use the language of comfort food? I like comfort food. We talk about that a little bit. Your comfort food might be very healthy, but often comfort food is code for fatty, sugary, highly processed food. And our bodies are not actually designed for that. And all the research suggests that what's best is food that has been minimally interfered with by human beings. So, the drill. Fruit, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, pulses, fish, meat, that sort of stuff, okay? So that's food, you know about that. The third thing he mentions there in that quote, experience occasional discomfort followed by recovery. Okay, so some challenges are good for us. It's actually really good to be pushed a little bit outside that comfort zone, as long as it's not constant. Okay, as long as it's not, our body has the opportunity to wind down again. Okay, now I just want to say something, some of you are parents, grandparents. It's actually really important that parents don't protect their children from the everyday challenges of life. Okay? Children need to be challenged. They need to be required to do things that they don't feel like doing. They need to experience failure and disappointment. These are very good things for children. Do you know about trees? You know that I like trees. Trees need wind to grow a good root system. The wind actually challenges and buffets them so they send the roots down deeper. They become stronger and more resilient. And it's the same with children. It's the same for all of us, actually, to help us to grow to be competent, responsible sort of people. But, and it's a big but, we need the pressure, but then we need the recovery. We need the sympathetic nervous system to do its thing. We need the parasympathetic to do its thing. And when the foot is stuck on the accelerator all the time, we're constantly revved up, and we're constantly living with chronic stress, that is very, very harmful for us. Okay? So the most important thing here is good sleep is vital. We need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. It goes down a little bit as you get older. Okay, I know that. But all the research suggests if you get less than 6 hours sleep a night consistently, that has huge impacts upon our well-being, physically and mentally. Okay, that's the first thing. You'll notice the final piece in that quote from Paul Taylor, to be highly socially connected. We'll come to that in just a moment, okay? Number 2, work at a healthy mindset. Okay, I've been talking to you about mindset and how our mindset, the lens through which we view life, the perspective through which we interpret stuff and what's happening to us, has a big impact upon our experience of life. And a very simple activity that helps shift our mindset in a helpful way is to write things down. I know it's very old technology. You know that I've talked about ruminating thoughts, okay? Thoughts racing through our head. When we actually try and write that stuff down, it slows the rumination and the chatter, and it enables us, instead of just being highly reactive and feeling very strong emotions, it enables us, our more planning sections of our brain to come into play and to actually think a bit more carefully about what's going on. For example, if Sarah was here, Sarah would talk to you about how she used to catastrophize a lot. The racing thoughts through her head were, my husband is dead in a car accident. Seriously. Back in the olden days, before mobile phones, I worked 15 minutes from home. I had a 50-minute car trip commute each way. And if I was running late, Sarah would be having my funeral in her head regularly. That's the way that her brain was working. And if you're prone to that sort of thing, going to the worst case scenario, here's a little exercise that might help. You see there? You just draw a horizontal line on a page. On the far left, you write the worst possible outcome. The far right, the best possible outcome. In the middle, the most likely outcomes. And again, it just stops those really strong feelings that we get and panicky stuff and whatever else. If you're prone to catastrophe. We're not all prone to that, but if you are, that might be something that could help. Another really healthy, a good practice for a healthy mindset is to avoid what I call the tyranny of the shoulds. The tyranny of the shoulds. Do you live your life by shoulds? What do I mean by that? Are you saying to yourself that I should never make any mistakes? That everyone should always like me? That nothing in my life should go wrong? Okay? These are unrealistic patterns of thinking that will make you feel down. And changing our thinking can actually change. Is that okay? Thanks, Nicole. Okay. Changing our thinking can change the way that we feel. And, okay, now I'm not sure how strong the evidence is for this, but I read a study that where people who practiced smiling more actually felt happier. Because of the connection between our bodies and our minds, what we do with our body can actually shape what we feel. Treat your body the way it's designed to work. Number 2, work at your healthy mindset. Number 3, oh, what a surprise. Look at this one. Pay attention to the good and beautiful things around you. Shifting your mindset is actually harder to do than you might imagine. When you're under stress, our mind tends to lock on to those negative thoughts. And particularly, what we tend to find is we have regrets about the past and we have worries about the future. And if you tend to get locked into that sort of space in your head, that does create those sort of ruts in our brain that are not terribly good for us. Okay? Now, I want to tell you about a study that was done back in 2010. Now, the date's significant because who can remember when the smartphone first arrived? Anyone know? What year? Here's a trivia question for you. 2007? Yep, 2007. Start of the smartphone. Okay? So 2010, we're in the early days of the smartphone, and they did this experiment. What they did was the researchers randomly throughout the day sent a text to a whole bunch of people, and when they got the text, they were asked to report on what they were thinking about and how they felt. Okay? What they were thinking about and how they felt. They found 47% of the time people's minds were wandering to the past and to the future. And when their minds were wandering, they actually felt worse than when they were in the moment. And that when they wrote up their study, they called it, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Okay, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So what can help calm down that brain chatter, that stuff that's racing through our minds, what can help calm that down is focusing on the present, the information that's coming in through our senses. And there's quite a lot of that just at the moment, isn't there? So this is why it's important to notice the trees. Now, trees may not be your thing. Maybe flowers are your thing. Maybe it's the clouds. Maybe it's the sunset. Maybe it's walking on the beach. But whatever it is, these things are really helpful for our mind. Now, you can't spend all your time just focusing on what's going on just around you. We need to sometimes think about the past and the future. But when we're just stuck in that negative headspace, that doesn't do us a lot of good. There's a really simple thing that we can do. If you ever heard of what's called grounding exercises, I'll just give you a little demonstration. What are 5 things that you can see at the moment? You can see, okay, I can see a coffee machine there. I can see a bunch of people here. I can see some lavender on that table. I can see some drums over here. I can see the lights up here. Okay, so there's 5 things that I can see. I've just focused on what's in my environment and I have not thought about what I'm thinking about. Okay? What are 4 things you can hear? Someone talking, someone clearing their throat. Every time I speak, we get this funny little echo. Okay?
You can also hear silence.
You can hear silence when there is silence. Yeah, okay. 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and you might have a drink of water, 1 thing you can taste. And just, if you're feeling really hyper stressed up and stuck in racing thoughts, just doing that little exercise to focus on what's going on in the environment around you can be very, very helpful. Okay? Simply going for a walk in nature can do this. Number 4, take a break from digital devices. Now, for some of you, you're of a generation like me where these things aren't really a big deal. But for some of you, if I said to you, okay, let me ask you this question. If I said to you now, I want you to turn this off, how would you feel? There's lots of people when I say that, they have a stress response, seriously, because their life revolves around this thing. And one of the things that gets in the way of us noticing, the trees, as I said before, is our digital devices. And most of us are unaware of just how stressful they can be. Do you know every time your phone pings, your body releases those stress hormones? Okay? You have that stress response. That's what happens. So I don't know what it's called digital hygiene. I don't know what yours is like. But having a few boundaries around that can be very helpful. So if you are a phone junkie, I just want to say, can you turn off your notifications? Can you cope with that? And if that's stressing you out, maybe you need to try doing that. Can I ask you, is the phone the last thing you look at night and the first thing you look at in the morning? I'm just wondering whether that is helpful for you and whether that's actually doing you a lot of good. Okay? Our brains need a break. And researchers have talked about, or someone termed this phrase, continuous partial attention. Continuous partial attention. And that's the way most people go through life now. Continuous partial attention, because we've got an eye on the phone. And I was at a cafe the other day and there's a bunch of people sitting around, they're catching up for coffee, every single one of them on their phone. They're not talking to each other. Sarah and I have been out for dinner and seen a couple having a romantic night out where they're both just on their phones. Right? Okay. So that's number 4. Number five. Practice thankfulness. I said how our mind's got this negativity bias, okay? We tend to lock on Velcro for the negative stuff, Teflon for the positive. One thing that can help shift that bias is to actually be trying to scan our environment for positive things. And it's a really simple exercise. So at our church this year, our church has a theme every year, and the theme this year is the year of the goodness of God. And at the start of the year, we were all given a little booklet, a journal, and we were asked every day, jot down 3 things that you're thankful to God for, and 1 thing where you did some good to another person. That's a really interesting exercise because it teaches your brain to start scanning for the positive, the things you can be thankful for. And that can be very helpful. Number 6, connect with others. And friends, this is a game changer. I've just got one more little prop to bring over, which is a book. I've got a book here. You may not have seen this book. This book's called The Good Life and How to Live It. It's not a Christian book. Lessons from the world's longest study on happiness. It's not actually a study just on happiness. It's a study on health. This is called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is the longest study of human beings ever conducted. It's still going, and it started in 1938. Now, most of the original people, they were both students at Harvard University, and there was a bunch of people in a very disadvantaged area in Boston who took part in this study as well. Most of them have died, but they've kept the study going with their families. And basically, every year or 2, they do a whole lot of measurements of these people. They test their blood, they do all this physical stuff and check all of that out. They do all these surveys, physical health, mental health. Now, here's the thing. If you were to take 84 years of the Harvard study and boil it down to a single principle of living, what would it be? I can tell you. Okay, so over 80 years of study, here's the 7 words for what they found. I quote, "Good relationships keep us healthier and happier." Full stop. Wow. If you were to make one choice, one single decision to best ensure your own health and happiness, science says the choice would be to cultivate warm relationships. Now, if you are a Christian believer, you'll know there's no surprises here because we believe the God at the heart of the universe is a God of loving relationship. Okay? I just want to say though, warm relationships. The way that we relate really matters. Positive interactions tell our bodies that we're safe. They calm us. They increase our sense of well-being. But negative interactions with other people create a sense of danger in us, and that brings on that stress response. So I've got, they were at top of page 8. I've got another little quote for you from Lisa Feldman Barrett. The best thing for your nervous system is another human being. The worst thing for your nervous system is another human being. It says it all, doesn't it? It says it all, and it is so true. We are like we're like leaves on trees. I think we're all unique, but we need to be connected in with others. That's where we find a source of life and support. What's one of our greatest strengths and resources. And research shows that people with high levels of social connection with others show lesser levels of stress-related health outcomes. So I just want to say to you, you might see yourself as a bit of a loner. I want to encourage you to think about who can I be connected with, find social support with, and make that a priority in your life. And I just want to say, this is where I think church communities can have a huge impact. And you may not be a church person, that's fine. But if you're really stuck about where you can start forming meaningful connections with other people, maybe a church would be a good place to start. I just want to say, I talk about the way that we relate to each other really matters. What's interesting is sometimes you look at people who are very kind and loving and gentle and you think, oh, that person's pretty soft. But actually that person's really tough. It's the tender traits that make us tougher as human beings, that actually build our resilience. And you think about it. So I mean things like being, compassion, forgiveness, gentleness, kindness. It's very interesting. You think about the person who holds grudges and lives with lots of grudges in their life. That person doesn't have high well-being. That person doesn't cope well with stress. But warm-heartedness actually feeds us, and it does calm us and helps to deal with life's challenges more effectively. Okay, last point before we have some question time. Number 7. Another tip to help build that capacity in your life and move you up that scale, of well-being, and that is to look beyond yourself. Here's a question for you, right? When you're on holidays, or whether you're at a footy game or, watching the Women's World Cup soccer, whatever it is, when you're doing that, what happens if you're constantly asking yourself, am I having a good time? You don't have a good time, do you? You don't have a good time. So often, it's when we're actually lifted outside of ourselves that we start to find ourselves. And I think this is one of the great mistakes that's permeated our society at the moment. That you work out who you are and you live your best life by just looking inside yourself. And we need to look inside ourselves, right? Important. Self-reflection is really important. But I don't think it's the complete answer. And simply focusing upon what I think I want and what I think is good for me, in the end, I'm not sure it actually delivers. Certainly in terms of me. And the research suggests, they've found, for example, people who volunteer, people who do random acts of kindness for others, people who help other people, not only does it help the other people, it helps them. They actually feel better. It actually lifts their well-being because they're lifted outside of themselves to focus upon it. People who are committed to a cause, it might be an environmental cause. Those people feel better. Simply focusing on what makes me feel good doesn't actually make us feel good in the long run. And I just want to share with you, friends, that for me, this is where my Christian faith is profoundly significant. It's a game changer for the way that I live my life. I've got a lot to be thankful for in life. I really do. So many things. I feel blessed in so many ways. I've got a wonderful wife. I've got fantastic children. I've got a couple of grandchildren. But I just want to say to you, my life, like your life, has had its moments. So for a number of years, I lived with a chronic health, a chronic facial nerve pain condition called trigeminal neuralgia. And at one point I thought I was going to have to live with it for the rest of my life. That's another sort of story. But that was not pretty to live with that. It was like electric shocks going off in my face. And I struggled to eat, and I struggled to drink, and I struggled to talk, and I struggled to do a lot of things. Someone said that I looked thin, but I've looked thinner. In recent years, there's been real heartache in my life. Deaths, relationship breakdown in my family and with close friends. But friends, I just want to say to you that in the midst even of that heartache, at the same time, I have felt a deep joy and peace in my heart. This is the interesting thing about human experience. We can feel multiple things at the same time. I can feel grief, I can feel heartache, and at the same time, I can experience a deep inner feeling of joy and peace as well. And for me, that comes down to my Christian faith. I think deep down, we all want to be like really known. We want someone to know what I'm really like. Now, not the face I present, but really be known, warts and all, and still be loved. And that's what I love about my wife. She knows my faults better than anybody. She still loves me. But with Christian faith, lots of people misunderstand Christian faith. They think it's all about what I do and how well I perform, but it's not, is it? God loves me simply because God loves me. And that's a beautiful truth. And the incredible thing is this God forgives me. All the junk in my life, there's things about me that I don't want you to know about. I'm not going to tell you. The things that make us feel guilty and we're ashamed of, some of the lies that we believe about ourselves, God just takes that stuff and because of Jesus Christ, he just forgives it. So it's gone, done away with, removed. And then this God welcomes me into his family with joy and with delight. And for me, to be fully known by God and to be completely loved by God is just, that's the very best thing for my well-being. These guys, relationships, number one. I'd make this number two for me personally. For me, it's my rich living relationship with God through our Lord Jesus Christ that's really made a difference. Okay, now, so there's 7 things, okay, 7 things to just increase our capacity a little bit, perhaps to manage the stuff that life throws at us, while at the same, and enabling us to move up that well-being scale in that diagram we saw at the start. So just to conclude before we go to questions, I just want to say, facing mental health challenges is a really difficult place to be. And I know for some, there must be people in this room who have been through, those stats, 1 in 5, have been through and are going through very difficult stuff. I want to acknowledge that. I don't want to be superficial. And if that's you at the moment, I want to say to you, if you have not reached out and sought help, please do that, okay? Please seek some help. But for all of us, no matter where you're at, remember there's small things we can do each day. Little things, noticing the trees, connecting in with others, just being careful with what we do with our bodies and our digital devices, etc. Those things can help us manage the stresses of life and improve our well-being. Okay, so let me pause and ask any questions that anyone has they would like to ask. Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, you have grandchildren, like I've got grandchildren, and it seems like in sport no one's allowed to lose anymore. How do you teach grandchildren that this is not what life's like? I don't know, maybe it's a case of just sort of sharing from your own experience and just saying, well, you know what, sometimes things don't go the way that we want. And even perhaps sharing some of your own experiences with them, telling some stories that help them to understand. I am concerned about some of the attitudes out there that, we're just, from a good motive, we want to protect children, sure, but we're not helping them by not letting them fail and not letting them experience. The resilience muscle actually has to be worked, and some hardship. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I don't think we're going to change society attitudes too quickly, but there has been a bit of a kickback against that, and I think some schools are seeing, the value in allowing a bit of failure, and I think some parents understand that as well. So, but it's not easy. So what about when they reach teenage years and they face bullying? How do we help with that? I think the number one thing that we can do is create, as much as we are able to, create the environment where children and our grandchildren feel loved, cared for, affirmed, accepted. Not by protecting them from every danger, but letting them know, I think you're great. I love you simply for who you are, irrespective of how you perform. It's that sort of, unconditioned love. So we're sending them the message, I think you're okay, even if other people are saying otherwise. There does need to be some protections in place around this, and again, schools are doing more in this area, because the online thing is the most dangerous thing. And this is where sometimes parents need to put some limits in place, even for teenagers. Because the way our young minds work is there are certain of the higher, what's called the higher cognitive functioning capacities, our executive control, our ability to make wise choices. Some of those parts of the brain don't fully develop until you're in your mid-20s. And therefore, your ability to make wise decisions when you're in those teen years there are some limitations. So this is where parents have got to help and put some boundaries in place around digital stuff. I think that can help. Yeah. So this is about self-image. It's about, how you feel about how you look. Young people, how they feel about how they look. Again, we've got a major problem here. The stats on eating disorders are very, very concerning. And can I say, it is not just young women, it is young men. So for young men are now a different form of the eating disorder, often, in terms of them trying to build a body that looks a certain way. We cannot completely sort of fix this, or, we're all prone to feel, I wish I looked a little bit different. Most of us are prone to that. But again, let's create environments where I don't care how you look, I think you're great. I love you. I love you for who you are. And whether you're this or whether you're that, that's not going to change. There's a little bit of the mindset thing in this, and perhaps just trying to bring, for Christian believers, we try and bring the light of Scripture to shine into these spaces and think, okay, well, does God think that, my worth and my value is determined by how I look, how my body looks? And of course not. And so I just try and reshape my mindset around that and say, okay, maybe I prefer to look a little bit different, but I'm not going to make a huge deal about that. And I'm going to treat my two boys exactly the same, irrespective of how they look. And they're going to know that I love them. And it's not to do with one being sporty and one not being so sporty. Yeah, but it's not easy, is it? It's not easy. Yeah. Difficult cultural moment we live in. Yeah. Okay, so this is, again, there's a whole range of experience here. Okay, so down that severe mental ill health and severe mental illness, there are things like schizophrenia and where people experience very unusual patterns of thinking, and who see things that aren't there and hear voices that aren't there. So hallucinations and people, when they're in that what's called a psychotic episode, that's difficult and that's complicated, and those people need good medical help at that time, and that needs to be assessed, and you need the professionals sort of involved in doing that. And the main thing that we can do if someone's in that very what's called florid sort of state is to try and make sure that they're receiving that help. There are people who have schizophrenia and the condition's managed by their medication, but they still might be a little bit unusual in the way, that we try and love and welcome. That's from my personal perspective as a Christian believer. Here is a person who bears the image of God and therefore is precious. And so let's try and treat everybody as precious, even those who are a little bit odd, a little bit unusual. It can be challenging, and this is where we need more than one person involved. So there are people like that, and they're here at this church, for example. We share that load around by seeking to genuinely try and care for that person. When you move a bit further along the scale, things like anxiety and depression, which are the two most common mental health conditions, again, that can be very trying. It can be very trying for someone seeking to care for someone with depression when they struggle to get out of bed in the morning and to do anything. Normally there are phases when things are more severe, and then they'll come up out of that a bit, but then they go back down into that. It just takes a lot of patience and a lot of love. And again, it's not our job to try and fix people. It's what can we offer in terms of walking alongside, seeking to support, sharing that load around with a few different people. Perhaps take turns saying, why don't we go for a walk together? Let's just get out and go for a walk. And if you've got a few different people doing that, there's a team providing some support and some love and some care. But really, the main thing we can do as non-professionals is just try and be there, be willing to listen, not try and offer quick fixes, not telling them, I'm sure it'll be better next week. But it can be a long, hard haul. Okay. Yeah. So that's just a couple of thoughts. Can I just say, little acts of, kindness and love like that. I've said we're holistic beings. For those of you who are Christian believers, our love is not just, we want people to come to know Jesus, absolutely. But, if people have a need, whether it's a need for food, we provide that. Whether it's a need for companionship, just those little things can really make a difference. Yeah.
I loved how you said, we've always got stress, but sometimes we just need to build our capacity to cope with that. So our body is just a bit small, and you gave us 7 beautiful tips there, which is great. And so I want to encourage you to do that, practice those things, because our capacity will be a lot better to handle stress, and then will be better for those around us as well, to love them like we've been talking about. So once again, it was great, the content, and you were very engaging. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very important topic.
Thank you.